This week on Bean Stuff, we begin to look at coffee processing, and we even touch a little bit on the dry process.
We were saying that I don't know all the parts of an engine. I've been on the bad side of smelling that person who decided to go natural.
Processing coffee, what we're talking about is how coffee goes from being inside of a cherry to being a ready seed.
You may have a whole lot of sellotape on that, and it's going to take much longer to get that off.
Sit there and sit there and sit there. Do you think that it's a lesser method?
If it works, then if it's not broken, then go for it. But there's different ways to get those layers off.
Welcome to
Bean Stuff.
Today we are starting to talk about some processes.
Oh, mate, it's not something you hear just, banter about processes in coffee.
This could be similar to our botany series. We're talking about how we first thought botany would be excessively boring, and we found that botany was less boring and more exciting than we expected.
If you understand that seed, you start understanding the cup that you're drinking. And it's good that we've done botany, and you need to go back and look at that or listen to that if you need to, because that botany part is a crucial part to now the process and how they're going to take apart the cherry, the botany, and how they're going to bring flavor to our cup.
Today we're going to start looking at the dry or natural process.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Which, I mean, there's a lot more than just that, but that's the one we're going to focus on today, and we'll do the others in another episode.
When you say the other, there's a lot of other processes, and they've all got their own names, and technically they've got names, and then there's tradition of what they've been called, and we were trying to work out how many processes we could come up with. I'm said there's probably 10 plus, I don't know. You could, if you want to really make it simplistic, we could bring it down to 2, perhaps 3.
So the dry process is also called the natural process. Out of the ones that we know of, it's one of the most basic processes to get to the actual bean itself.
Basic doesn't necessarily mean inferior.
Right.
It can do, and there's potential for that. We're going to look at that. But it is a basic one because the most simple style, the limited amount of material and resource you have, this one can be done. And
I think of it, so it's a basic process. It's simple, not in a bad way necessarily, but it is also very natural, and that could be a good thing or a bad thing.
That's right.
I think of it like those who choose not to wear deodorant.
Ooh, okay.
That could be a choice. Maybe deodorant reacts a certain way, or maybe you just don't want to wear deodorant. And in some cases, that can turn out perfectly fine, or in some cases, that can turn out really, really not so good for everybody else.
I guess I feel like that's been my experience.
You've been the bad side of deodorant?
No. I've been on the bad side of smelling that person who decided to go natural.
So I think, there are two sides to that coin. I think we'll get into some of that. But it is a very natural process, and so that gives it some risks, and there's also some benefits to that as well.
A deodorant which can be good, and you can smell some really nice things, and if you don't, hopefully you're going to smell some really nice things too.
Right.
But whichever way you look at that, the flavor, the eventual smell, and coffee is going to be the flavor you're going to taste, is so wrapped up in this whole fruit, of the coffee. It's so important to it that we don't tend to think of it, but if you don't think about it, if it's not thought about, you will have a bad cup of coffee in the morning or in the evening.
The process that coffee is, how it's processed, has such an effect on the flavor. It's kind of like the engine in a car.
Yes.
So like if you have, it's almost like, how is the engine made in the car? Did I make it in the garage by myself? Because if that's the case, it's going to be a really bad car. But if
better than that, if I had done that,
probably fairly equal. But if BMW makes an engine, or Ford or Chrysler or Chevy, so wherever your loyalty lies, that's going to be a much better engine than I can manufacture in the garage by myself. And it's much like that with coffee. Like, the process is so important and vital to the final cup. Like, yes, there's the grower, there's the botany side, there's the, how is it grown and all that. But once that process is completed, it's on to that next stage. And it's Now it's how is the coffee processed? How is that, and those all have a huge effect on the flavor, and all these different methods do as well. So with the natural process, it's it's one of those ways to make the engine.
That's right. We were saying that I don't know all the parts of an engine, but the carburetor and the alternator, if you don't have those fashioned and done correctly, you're going to have a bad ride in your car as you're going to have a bad cup of coffee.
Absolutely. And for those who don't know that the process or processing coffee, what we're talking about is how coffee goes from being inside of a cherry or the fruit to being a ready seed, or what we think of as coffee, but ready to roast. So that green bean, that seed that you can roast, Dad.
I'm very fortunate to do that, and that is that a misconception too out there that we talk about the bean as if the beans miraculously come to the shop and there we have it. There's many things that have happened to get that bean there, but what I'm saying here is the bean was wrapped up in a whole lot of layers, and the whole thing is called a seed, a coffee cherry.
Right.
And that bean we're talking about is actually the seed right in the middle of all this other layers of stuff.
I think of it like the pit of an apricot.
Yep.
So it's kind of the seed that oftentimes in a lot of fruits we end up throwing away.
That's a good point. Whereas here in coffee, we're saying, no, that's what we're after. We want that bit.
Well, and it's interesting. When's the last time, this has been not going to be as good of a question for you, but when's the last time you actually ate like the fruit of the coffee instead of the bean? We use so much. I mean, we both are using. We talked about that in an earlier episode a little bit as well, but it's a little bit interesting. But the dry process, the natural process, that we're going to use those terms intermittently, and those are the same.
Yeah.
But it's a very simple process. Essentially, once the beans are picked, and we'll definitely break this down, but they are put and dried as a whole fruit.
The whole thing's just you pick it off the tree and whoop onto the ground or the raised bed, and it's starting to dry.
I think of it like if you were to bring an apricot home to your house from the store, and you were to throw it on the back deck in the sun in the middle of the summer, and you just let it sit there and sit there and sit there to being a ready seed. And eventually, obviously, it's going to dry up, and there's going to be things we have to do to get the seed out. But that's kind of similar to as far as a simplistic view of the dry process.
Yeah, that's good.
This is a pretty old method, as far as I am aware.
Yeah.
I think you talked about thousands of years ago in Ethiopia and
very much known there, Yemen, that it's old, it's simple, but perhaps because they didn't have the technology or the mechanics to do it any different sort of way. It's a basic, easier method.
And you were saying it's also the most environmentally friendly method.
Interesting. And I did say that, and because that's changing a little bit. Why it's the environmentally friendly way is because it's using not much water, if water at all.
Right.
And that's environmentally friendly. You're not.
It's also there's not much mechanical. Like there's not much. There's there may be a machining in the hulling process or later on, but there's not a lot of machines and everything.
No, so it's in that sense it's very environmentally friendly. Where I was saying, we're going to get onto the wet process one day, where that's getting better than it used to be. I mean, today in a lot of places it uses a lot of water, and then where does that water go? Does it contaminate, go back into the streams and the rivers, or does it get recycled? But again, through technology, things have what they've made available now. The machines now make it a lot less water used, which is making that a little more environmentally friendly as well.
And it's interesting because I think of dry method and I think of, cost effective. It's very easy. It's very simple. And I think it gets sometimes labeled as a poor man's process.
It does. And I understand there's reasons for that too, because sometimes it can go too far that way.
Right.
And the end product is not very nice because there's some really dangers and risks in doing it this easy way.
Yeah.
And because it's an easy way, it can easily go wrong as well.
Do you think that it's a lesser method?
Or lesser, you mean?
As far as like inferior to other processes because it is so simple, or does it have...
All right.
I guess, yeah.
I think it's more an older method rather than a lesser method.
Yeah.
It can be lesser if it's done wrongly. And I think in the last years, it's started to realize, man, we can get flavors here in the cup that people just really love.
Do you find that like there are coffee producing countries that could go wet process or a different process that choose dry process, or like even like coffee buyers that say, hey, we'd like to see this in a dry process because they're just curious what the flavor might bring out?
Yeah, and that is happening a lot these days, which is good for the industry, that realizing that we could do both, and we could do both really well.
Right.
And now you've got, the farmer has the option, I could go wet or dry, I could go pulp, I could go natural. There's a whole lot of methods now they can do to make it profitable for them to sell really, really good coffee.
And I think that's an interesting point too, is it could be, you can see it as this cost-effective way to process coffee, but it could also be seen as a different way to process coffee. So, you could have an Ethiopian coffee processed, a wet process or dry, and you might get two different flavors and you might prefer one to the other, but it's a way that we can, pull out different flavors from the actual bean.
And that's really helpful to the farmer again. I'm always into what's helpful to the farmer in terms of climate and things like that. If it's already a wet season, they can change their method to make it a wet process compared to if it's a really dry season, they could go the more natural way. We'll talk about that in a moment, why that's the case.
Right.
But, even at work now, I've had different types of Brazil coffees, pulp natural. I've had natural. We have a natural one right now, the Brazil Monte Carmelo. It's really nice and natural coffee, but they do different things there. I say that because countries just in tradition and history, they've tended towards one or another a little more, and that's starting to change. But they found if it works, then if it's not broken, then go for it and do it well.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
That's exactly, yeah.
So just to take kind of a step back from the specific process we're looking at, but just to take a step back and kind of look at processing as a whole, what is the point of processing? And this might sound like a silly question, but what would you say the point of processing is?
The point of processing a coffee is you're trying to bring out what the genetics have done, what's in that coffee. You're trying to take all the things that have happened in the bean as it's growing, the botany again, and you're saying, okay, let's bring that, and through these different processes, what will enhance, what will bring out the flavor that's already within this bean? What's going to make this just so good that you just want this coffee?
Well, and I think that's a really good point, because it's almost like each step in the coffee process has the ability to dilute or contaminate the flavor of the bean. So, the farmer does a really good job, but then processes it and doesn't do a good job. There's that moment where he can ruin that or enhance it. Or it's almost like you start with coffee. Obviously, you start with a coffee tree.
Yes.
But it's the best it's ever going to be if you pick it ripe, if it's grown correctly.
Yep.
And every step along that process either keeps it as good as it can be or brings it down in quality a little bit. And so there's so many tiers to that, and processing being a pretty large tier.
It's a big tier.
Has a pretty good ability to affect the flavor.
It's a sort of like a camouflage thing going on, that you can have a really good product, but you could camouflage it and you could make it less than what it really is, by the process, by all the other things you just mentioned. And what we're trying to take that layer off, that mask off, and saying, here it is, and man, it's good.
Right. And there's delicacy to that process of processing. I'm going to say that word a lot.
Processes.
Oh, I don't know. Processi. But it's kind of like, how do we get the goodness of the bean out of the cherry, out of the fruit?
That's right. That's the really importance of this subject.
Right.
Is you say you could go badly wrong, or you could go really right. You could do such a good job that you could save a few things that perhaps was done a little wrong. They picked a few overread ones, but through the process, you just tweaked a little enough to make it actually, this is tasting good now.
It's like working with audio. You can tweak the EQ of it to make it to balance out the sound a little bit. You can never, you always have a product you start with, but you can try and balance it.
Yeah.
Now, do you remember a game called Pass the Parcel?
I do, but I'm not sure where this is going, but yes.
Well, track with me for a second here. I think of like the processing portion of coffee, kind of like Pass the Parcel.
Mm.
If you haven't played Pass the Parcel, essentially you have a gift at the center of multiple layers of wrapping.
Ooh, I like this. I
But
like
the
where this
multiple
goes.
layers, you don't know how many there are. So that might be different to coffee. We know how many layers of coffee there are. But you basically, it's kind of like a mixture of opening presents and musical chairs.
Mm-hmm.
And you pass this package to someone. They open up one layer and then they pass it on to the next person. Or no, sorry, I'm so wrong. You pass the package to someone. I pass it to you.
Yeah.
You get it, and whenever the timer stops,
That's right.
whoever has it can open one layer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is less like coffee than I was hoping, but yeah, we'll go with it. We'll go with it. So you slowly pull apart those layers, but if you rip and tear, you might end up actually ruining what the gift is in the inside of it. So there's that. You have to go through the actual process, the way the game is designed, the way that these processes are designed to work in order to capture the flavor that process can from the bean. That was a long detour. It was a scenic route.
Are you telling me that we need some music and as we process coffee that'll we can just stop the music and start the music and it'll help?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I think what you're saying there is the bottom line. Yeah, that's not a bad illustration actually. Yeah.
Oh, and I guess the point is this is a crucial step before the barista even gets a hold of it, before the roaster gets a hold of it. This is kind of our second place after getting from the tree, growing the tree. We're getting to the point where we can affect the flavor, and we need to watch what we're doing. And there are multiple ways to process that. And today we're talking obviously about the dry process.
I'm liking this illustration more now as I think about what you just said.
Yeah.
And when you wrap those parcels, that present, you wrap it up, you can have thick hard paper. You can have tissue paper as you wrap it up, which means, though, as you take that layer off, you can be a little harsher or you can need to be a lot more delicate. It may have a whole lot of sellotape on that, and it's going to take much longer to get that off, that layer off. And this is where I like this in terms of with the coffee cherry. It's got, as you're saying, lots of layers, but there's different ways to get those layers off. And you could rip, as you're saying, and some are going to come off really easily. Others are just going to take a long time. We probably should finish on this illustration.
Yes,
maybe taking too far, but I was just going to say,
we could have a whole new podcast.
I think we could. I'm
game stuff.
Those different layers,
right?
You could just throw them away and discard them in that way, or you could use them to recycle.
That's a better way to look at it.
And some of those layers, and that's what a lot of farmers do. They take some of those parts to use as fuel to heat up to dry the bean.
Yeah.
Some take it the cascara and they can sell that as well. And you can go to some coffee shops and have some cascara, which is part of the outer shell of the coffee.
But just to give you a good rundown of six of the six major ones that we found or that we have worked with.
I changed it a bit on your read.
You changed it? You can't change things on me.
I'm sorry, mate.
Well, I'll let you go through it then. If you change
okay. Here we're talking about the dry.
Right, we are. Yep.
Which also can be called natural, and that's why it's a natural process.
Nothing's changed so far.
No, there you go. Nothing's, and then you've got the wet.
Okay.
Or it can be called washed because there's water that washes the mucilage off.
Right.
You've got another one called pulped natural.
Ooh.
And that's where they take the skin off, and we're going to talk about this at one stage, and how they leave the mucilage on there. And in that one, it could also be called honey, which has a whole lot of subsections, the honey coffee, or I'm not sure how to say it, miel, M-I-E-L. It's the same sort of thing, but just slight, very technical differences.
A little variation.
Yeah.
And are you about to say the last one that I like?
I've got 3 on the last one.
Oh, you've got 3.
Bring it on. You say it, though.
No, I want you to say it. I like the way you said it.
Oh, Giling Basha.
Oh my.
Oh, you like that, do you?
Giling Basha.
Oh, my.
Giling Basha.
I'm feeling Gila Basha.
Oh, my hair was today. I was like Giling Basha.
Oh, yeah. I hope for Christmas I'm going to get a Giling Basha.
Oh, yeah. No, I'll go to Giling Basha.
Or that can be also called wet hulled, which obviously doesn't sound as good.
Not as fun at all.
Or it could be called semi-washed. So there's all these.
You could call it those.
You could.
You should call it. yelling Basha.
I believe in Sumatra and Sulawesi, that's what they call it, and it's got a good ring to it, name to it.
It's definitely got a potent. It's got a good name. But just those are kind of an overview, and we'll go through some of those in other episodes. But the dry process.
Yes.
Now that we've noodled around for a while, let's get into how do we get the goodness out of the bean using the dry process. So there's multiple steps to get the bean ready, roast ready.
Yes.
It doesn't just pop out of the cherry. What's the first step of getting that bean ready?
Well, in the natural process, the first thing, I guess, is, as in all the processes, you pick the fruit.
I was going to say, other processes don't pick the cherry.
yeah.
But you said all, so that's good.
They do. And you pick that cherry off. And we've said this before, but
is it hand picked or is it mechanically picked?
Both. Brazil does a lot of a machine because it's flat and there's room to move the machines up. Whereas in Peru and other places,
which is interesting because machines may not be able to tell the difference between a ripe cherry and an unripe cherry.
They may not. I think the argument against that would be they would, rattle the
ripe ones would or should fall off.
They should fall off. Now others don't, and so they've perfecting that, and it's not too bad, I believe. But if you're picking it by hand, which probably most of the world does,
right.
And it's available to be picked. When I say that, it's not, you're not sort of suspended from ropes trying to get coffee, because trees
like
get
trapeze act.
That's right, they get that big. But you pick the coffee off, and that is the first part of all the processes that you're picking a ripe one, unripe, or overripe.
Well, and it's interesting because almost like the processing starts before it even gets picked.
Exactly.
Because if you do pick an unripe one, obviously that's going to have its own flavor set that comes with it. But if you pick one that's overripe, it's already started its own fermentation process possibly. And so there's stuff that's going on that you don't necessarily have control over. And again, that might be one bean in 1,000 or something, but there's still that potential.
I think you'd be surprised that one bean in 1,000, just how potent that can be.
Right. Well, and especially once it's ground up, it could ruin an entire cup of coffee, or depending on how large you're brewing that, it could ruin quite a bit.
Yep.
So there is an importance. So picking it, but then the actual bean is almost like its own little incubator with the cherry and everything there.
That's right. So you've picked that, and as you say, you've got those layers, and the right one in the middle there is the seed that's usually in two halves. That's what you're after.
Right.
But you've picked it off, and at the moment it's in that package. That package is all wrapped up with a whole lot of layers. So you've picked, in this case, you're actually being very particular about what the outer wrapping is, if you put it that way, the paper is, because you want it to be a certain color, which is going to relate to the genetics of the bean itself.
Right.
You're going to know if it's ripe or unripe or overripe. So you're going to pick that one, and it's in your hand now. And you then are going to put it into a bucket or a sack or something to hold it in your apron, whatever it may be.
Fanny pack.
Yep. There you go.
It might take a while to pick stuff.
And it goes into that particular container as such. That's the first thing you're going to do.
Right. So gathering the quantity of your
You've got a
fruit.
bucket of this fruit now, which doesn't actually, if you're a picker, it's probably you're not going to get a lot of money for that, but that's another podcast. We keep saying
that. So you get the coffee picked. You make sure that the coffee is the right coffee that you're picking. You make sure that what you're picking is not, overripe, all those pieces. And then you gather it all together. And then so once we've got all well, I guess we don't have beans at that point. We have fruit.
You have the fruit. They have the cherry, the coffee cherry. Yep.
Right. What do we do? What's our next step in that? Like, I've got my fanny pack full of cherries.
Right.
What do I do?
We don't think of it, but some places you've got a long trek now to get that bucket of coffee, those cherries, to somewhere that's going to start this process that we're talking about.
Well, we were talking to Mike and Emily McIntyre, and they talked about driving in Jeeps to a certain point, and then they had to get on donkeys because it was too steep and too muddy to get to a plantation where there was a bunch of
it's just the transport. We think of just there's a road, and you just put over there and get on the train.
UPS,
UPS, there you go. But no, there's a whole process in getting it. Physical thing happens.
Well, and there's so much that could happen in that part of it.
Oh dear. Yeah, you're right.
I mean, in the transportation of it, we could have something in the air. We could have something. It could be transported with other things. It could be bananas. Oh my goodness.
That's right. Or it could be just a really humid day, and they can't get as far as they want on that day, and suddenly you got fermentation you were talking about before, and suddenly things get ruined.
It's almost like a timer starts.
Yeah, it is. That's a very good point, and you need to keep moving.
And it's hard to know when that timer starts. Does it start when the coffee plant was planted? You know, like, but it's like almost once you've picked that right cherry,
you've started the timer, definitely.
Right, you've pulled the pin, and you've got a little bit of a window that you need to be within.
Yes.
So once they've picked it, they then are gonna sort it potentially.
That's right, and they will, because when you pick it, no matter, because it's on a tree,
right,
you're gonna get some twigs.
Pick up on the conversation next week when we continue to talk about processing and dig deeper into the dry process.